You're listening to Uptown Radio. It's February 9th. I'm Juan Torres Falcon.
And I'm Augusta Anthony. The NYPD has sped up a plan to invest millions of dollars in body cameras. But will it stop police from targeting minorities?
If you're going to pull over, get out of your van and say, excuse me, hey, stop. Your camera should be on.
New Jersey's 11th district has been Republican for 3 decades straight. But for this midterm election, Democrats may have a fighting chance.
Our representative works for us and is accountable to us and needs to come back and tell us what he's doing on our behalf. And he refused.
Last week, Governor Cuomo revealed his plan to build offshore wind farms in New York State.
New York is trying to be one of the first movers on this, and that's exciting.
All that and more on Uptown Radio. First, the news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Lakshmi Singh. Growing tension in the West Wing today as it faces persistent questions about the White House's handling of domestic abuse allegations against former Staff Secretary Rob Porter. Specifically, who knew what and for how long. Porter resigned this week after his 2 ex-wives spoke out publicly about the alleged abuse. NPR's Tamara Keefe says President Trump addressed the matter today.
The White House's initial defense of former Staff Secretary Rob Porter, even after pictures emerged of his first wife with a black eye, have generated criticism. President Trump has now weighed in.
I found out about it recently, and I was surprised by it. But we certainly wish him well. It's a obviously tough time for him. He did a very good job when he was in the White House.
Trump did nothing to distance himself from Porter.
As you probably know, he says he's innocent. And I think you have to remember that. He said very strongly yesterday that he's innocent.
In the brief remarks, President Trump did not express concern for the women involved. Tamara Keith, NPR News, the White House.
It's been widely reported that Porter is dating White House Communications Director Hope Hicks. Porter's second wife, Jennifer Willoughby, told CNN she's worried about Hicks. She says she believes her ex-husband has not gotten the help he needs and that given the stress he may be facing, Willoughby suggests Porter could become violent. In an interview on NBC, Willoughby says abuse is, in her words, a tricky thing.
It starts slow and it starts a cycle sort of where you don't really see it for what it is. I don't think I realized that I could even call my marriage abusive until about a year in.
Willoughby speaking to NBC's Today Show. A California lawmaker who's been one of the most outspoken leaders of the Me Too movement at the state capitol is now the subject of a sexual misconduct investigation herself. Capitol Public Radio's Ben Adler reports from Sacramento the state assemblywoman is taking a leave of absence.
A former legislative staffer says Los Angeles County Democrat Cristina Garcia cornered and groped him in 2014 after the annual legislative softball game. Daniel Fierro told colleagues at the time but did not report the incident, which occurred years before the Me Too movement. Last month, he told his former boss, another assemblyman, who reported the incident to the assembly, which in turn has hired an outside law firm to investigate. In a statement, Garcia says she's certain she did not engage in the behavior she's accused of, but will take an immediate unpaid leave of absence during the investigation. Garcia has previously called on other California lawmakers accused of sexual harassment to resign. For NPR News, I'm Ben Adler in Sacramento.
Before the closing bell, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 330 points, or 1.3%, at 24,190. The Nasdaq was up 1.4%. S&P 500 up nearly 1.5%. This is NPR News.
From New York, I'm Dan Rabb. The second government shutdown in as many weeks began and ended in the pre-dawn hours this morning. President Trump signed a bill that is expected to add an estimated $320 billion to the federal deficit. Reaction to this spending deal among New York politicians has been decidedly mixed. The state Senate delegation split its vote, with Chuck Schumer voting in favor, but fellow Democrat Kristen Gillibrand opposed. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said this morning that he's pleased the bill includes provisions for infrastructure spending in the city.
What we really need, what's always worked for this country, is heavy infusions of federal money to fix infrastructure for the good of our people and our economy. So it's good to see that in the bill.
The spending deal will fund the federal government through March 23rd. Immigrant rights leader Ravi Ragbir will be allowed to stay in the United States, at least for now. A federal judge in Manhattan issued a temporary stay of deportation this morning, one day before Ragbir was set to be removed from the U.S. Rugbier's arrest and detention by ICE last month touched off protest here in New York. Rugbier has since sued the federal government, arguing he was unfairly targeted due to his activism. Today's ruling allows him to stay in the country until his case is heard. It was a surprise arrest this morning in another Manhattan courtroom. The government's star witness in the bribery trial of a former aide to Governor Andrew Cuomo was taken into custody moments after testifying. Todd Howe admitted during his cross-examination that he had violated the terms of his plea deal. The arrest comes after Howe testified earlier this week that former Cuomo aide Joseph Bacoco had accepted bribes in exchange for help with state business. You'll need to use cash to buy a Metro card from midnight tonight until 6 a.m. Saturday morning. The MTA says a system-wide software update is to blame. MTA officials had initially announced that the upgrade would prevent riders from using credit and debit cards for an entire weekend, but they scaled back the plan after intense public backlash. Again, the MTA will be cash only between midnight tonight and 6 tomorrow morning. It's currently 29 degrees and cloudy in Manhattan. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Dan Rabb.
This is Uptown Radio. I'm Juan Torres Falcon.
And I'm Augusta Anthony. It's been a wild ride. The Dow Jones Industrial Average plunged by over 1,000 points on Monday, rebounded on Tuesday, then dropped again yesterday. My co-host, Juan Torres Falcon, spoke with Daniel Niles, a founding partner of Alpha One Capital Partners, about what all this means for the market and investors.
Dan, what can we attribute this market's wild ride to?
Well, I think the first thing you have to realize is this isn't really a wild ride. It only seems that way because things have been so calm for so long, and that's not really that healthy. So if you put this in historical perspective, normally you get about a 10% market correction once a year. The last time you got a 10% correction was actually back in February of 2016, so almost 2 years ago. So we were long overdue. In terms of what really triggered this, the big thing is the rise in bond yield. The problem with bonds is, at one point you were getting yields as low as 1.4% actually back in July of 2016. Well, what you've seen recently is that return to now it's close to 2.9%. And so what people are doing is pretty rational, saying, wow, they've tripled. I can get a 2.9% return now if I put my money into the bond market and buy a 10-year Treasury bill, and that's better than the 1.8% return I get in terms of dividends on stocks. And that's really what's happened is people just got way too complacent. They thought they could, make money with no risk of drawdowns, and now you're having the market starting to readjust, and that could take a while.
Dan, if market swings, like this is a correction. Economists call this a correction. What exactly that means? So it's when the market drops more than 10%?
Yes, I mean it's nothing that scientific. Yeah, a correction is when the S&P drops more than 10% or whatever index you're looking at. A bear market is considered when it drops more than 20%. So, and those drops are typically triggered by a recession.
For the average investor to look at this, it's more so about playing the long game, and that this week's behavior is really not an indication of true market performance.
Yeah, when investors should have been worried was in January. They should have looked at that and gone, the market's almost up 10% in a month? How does that make any sense? When the market drops like this, that makes a lot more sense. I mean, the economy is better, but it's not, 10% better in 1 month. It had been going up for almost 9 years, right? So the time you have to really get concerned is if you think the economy is slowing down and headed into a recession. So, 10% drops, people should look at that and say, oh, well, that's good. And if you see another situation where the market's up almost 10% in a month, you should be thinking of selling, not buying at that point.
Dan Niles, founding partner of Alpha One Capital Partners.
My pleasure, Juan. Have a good day.
We're in the midst of the worst flu season in decades. In New York City alone, there have been record numbers of hospitalizations and deaths.
And though it's late in the season, doctors still insist a flu shot can help, but some are questioning if it really will. Mira Gable reports.
I've never gotten the flu vaccine in my life.
Yes, about 3 months ago. My daughter advised me I should have it.
I always get it, and because I'm of an older age, I don't want to get the flu.
Outside of Amsterdam Family Health Clinic, there's some doubt about the vaccine. But there's no doubt for Dr. Joseph Florio, who's seen a large influx of patients with the flu. He insists patients get the shot, even though some ask, does it matter?
Some people will get the flu vaccine late in the season during an epidemic like this, and then a day or two later they'll come down with the flu, and they'll associate the fact that they got sick with getting the flu shot.
That's not true, he says. There are, however, lots of reasons that make the development of the flu vaccine problematic. It all goes back to just after World War II, when scientists began growing influenza strains in chicken eggs, and that system hasn't changed much since. By putting the virus in a chicken egg, its embryo breaks down the virus's protective protein coat, killing it, creating a vaccine. This makes the vaccine limited by the market. 1 egg equals 1 flu shot.
The present method really isn't sustainable. You just can't make enough fast enough.
That's Stephen Morse, a professor of epidemiology at Columbia's Mailman School of Public Health.
Making it in eggs is a slow process, and it's not easy to change if you discover that you're making a vaccine for the wrong strain, for something that you thought was coming, but it turns out something else is coming.
The development of the flu vaccine is tricky, not only because the virus strains are able to mutate, but because the science boils down to prediction. Scientists monitor popular flu strains in the southern hemisphere to predict what flu might populate in the northern hemisphere.
There's a global system of what are like flu weathermen stationed around the planet.
Dr. David Perlman, chief of infectious diseases at Mount Sinai, said viruses can mutate in 2 ways: randomly, with little blimps in their own DNA, and largely by getting whole new bits of genetic material from another species, like pigs and birds, to create new strains.
It has not yet appeared that there's a whole new different strain like the 1918 strain that went around the world. There's just more flu.
Scientists don't know really why there is more flu, but just like weathermen, they can miss their mark too. The bets scientists make while creating a new batch of flu vaccine every year may more or less match the strains that actually circulate. The flu season is expected to die down in April, but until then, says Professor Morse,
take your vaccine.
Mira Gable, Columbia Radio News.
In January, viewers packed a local New York comedy club. Our reporter Dan Rabb found that being a comic isn't always a laughing matter.
My name is Bill Petit, and I'm a stand-up comedian. I think this is a city for stand-up. You might go to L.A. to be famous, but you got good in New York. L.A. comics act out their bit, Chicago comics think out loud, and New York comics live their bit. A lot of modern stand-ups are really just insecure dudes. I think we have an addiction to kind of the response that people give us, but I think that gets in the way of a clarity of what we're trying to accomplish. I've said awful things in the attempt to be funny, yet the thing is that a comedian's given the license of that no one else is the license to be awful. Dude, I used to bomb all the time. I used to perform 5 to 6 times a night, and I'd bomb 5 or 6 times a night. I'm not even joking. I remember one time I bombed at a coffee shop. I bombed so bad I cried at home, and then I wrote down everything that was more important to me than stand-up, and that actually made me funnier because, like, taking comedy seriously isn't funny.
That was our reporter Dan Rabb speaking with Bill Petit at Stand Up New York in Manhattan.
Mayor de Blasio recently announced he's speeding up a plan to equip the NYPD with body cameras. A couple thousand are already in use, but he wants all patrol officers to wear cameras by the end of this year. That's a year earlier than planned.
The $20 million program was ordered by a federal judge in 2013 after finding that the NYPD's stop and frisk tactics were targeting minorities. But advocates are asking whether moving the plan faster is going to help. Julia Jabkiru reports.
Some NYPD officers now patrol the streets with a new device on their uniform, a camera to record their interactions with civilians. And it's because of this kind of story.
Right here, this is where it all happened. He was told that he had his brake light out, and the officer was being very aggressive.
That's Andrea Colon, a 17-year-old high school student and community organizer with the Rockaway Youth Task Force. We're on Beach Channel Drive, in front of a car wash. It's a typical New York neighborhood, with a deli, a KFC, and a laundromat. Colon says it happened right here.
And the male who was stopped became sort of defensive, and that's when the officer, 3 officers just came and tackled him.
Colon was born in Rockaway, but her father came from Puerto Rico and her mother from Guatemala. She says, like her, many members of the community are people of color. But the officers who patrol the streets are white, and that creates tension.
Of course, this was a black man, and it just shows the
the racism, honestly. Like, it's deep and rooted racism, and it shouldn't be happening in our community. Our police should protect us. We shouldn't be afraid of them.
And according to Mayor Bill de Blasio, that's where body cameras come in, to establish transparency, accountability, and trust between police officers and the communities they patrol. But expensive high-tech body cameras are not a silver bullet. That's according to Seth Stoughton. He teaches law at the University of South Carolina, and he's a former cop.
Just having body cameras is not what matters. What matters is how you use the body cameras.
Nikita Price works with the homeless in Harlem. He agrees it's not just cameras that matter. He says the rules for when officers turn their cameras on are also a problem. They don't make recording mandatory for all encounters, only the violent ones. But often, seemingly ordinary encounters can escalate.
It is the policy. I think if you're going to stop a person in the street, if you're going to pull over, get out of your van and say, excuse me, hey, stop. Your camera should be on. Your camera should be on.
Price says another problem is there are no strict rules about when footage should be released to the public.
Once an officer does engage in turning on the camera, they have access to that footage, and we don't.
Which brings us back to the trust issue. Richard Aborn, president of the Citizens Crime Commission, a criminal justice advocacy group, says it's crucial the NYPD releases body camera footage.
When video exists and it's held back from the public gets suspicious. And I understand that. So I think it's the imperative here to get the videos out as soon as possible.
Since the beginning of the program in April, the NYPD has only released 3 videos, according to the Center for Constitutional Rights. So for Seth Stoughton, law professor and former police officer, speeding up the rollout of the body cameras is not a wise decision. He says the NYPD should wait for the results of the 1-year pilot program.
Until you test this equipment in your local conditions and using your own policies and procedures, you're not going to know what effect these cameras are going to have. You might hope that they have a particular effect, but hoping isn't knowing.
The NYPD says it will issue up to 2,000 cameras every month. By the end of this year, 18,000 police officers will be equipped with them. Juliette Jepkirou, Columbia Radio News.
The Winter Olympics kicked off last night in Pyeongchang with a show of unity between North and South Korea. Athletes from both countries entered the stadium together, waving flags for a unified Korea in their first joint march since 2007.
It's an unusual move for 2 countries still technically at war. My co-host, Augusta Anthony, spoke to Usha Haley, a professor at West Virginia University who specializes in Asian relations. She explains to us what this symbolic gesture might mean.
So, Professor Haley, last night the North and South Korean Olympic athletes entered the stadium together in a show of unity. What does this mean for the 2 countries to walk in together?
Well, I think it's what they hope for, some sort of rapprochement, some ability to speak to each other. So I see this as a great first step.
But a year ago, these 2 countries were on the brink of nuclear war. So how did we get here?
They're still on the brink of nuclear war. There are more there are more missiles pointed from North Korea towards Seoul than towards any other country in the world. So that hasn't changed. But this is an opportunity to at least see a human face from either side, and that hasn't happened since the 1950s.
And do you think that this is going to translate into talks? And what do you think that would look like, talks between the 2 countries?
I don't know whether it will actually go any further. I mean, I do know that North and South Korea are going to be meeting again. So, for example, South Korean President Moon has been invited to Pyongyang, and there's going to be another Olympic ceremony being held sometime around, and then there's going to be talks between South Korea and the United States as well as joint military exercises. So I don't think anything major is going to be happening before the end of April.
And you mentioned that the Olympics just put a human face on these relations. How does that help?
it helps because they're willing to talk. It doesn't benefit anyone to go through a war. And I think even North Korea realizes that. The question here is, why is the United States taking such a hardline stance?
But last night, Vice President Mike Pence was sitting in a box with the North Koreans. And last week, President Trump recognized the parents of Otto Warmbier, who died last year after being in prison in North Korea. And he called them powerful witnesses to a menace that threatens our world. So why is Vice President Pence sitting in a box with North Koreans?
Because the South Korean president, Moon, wants some kind of rapprochement. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
So is this a good thing for North Korean relations with the U.S.?
I don't think it looks good for the United States for President Trump or Vice President Pence to be sitting there stoically refusing to shake hands, smile, or talk, or engage in any kind of niceties. And so I don't think I think it tarnishes the United States' reputation and continues to erode our soft power in the world.
Professor Haley, thank you so much for speaking to us.
Apple officially released the HomePod today, a smart speaker that integrates with Siri, its digital assistant to play music, recite the news, and control devices throughout your home.
While Apple was an early entrant to the voice assistant space, its new $350 smart speaker is going to face some tough competition. Cassiana McClenahan was at the Apple's Fifth Avenue store for the launch.
It is 7:45. And there's no one here. There is no one in line. Not every Apple product can be as big a hit as an iPhone, and Apple took pre-orders through its website, which may also explain the slow day in stores. While Apple has designed the HomePod to listen to conversations, the company was not as excited about letting reporters listen to people interacting with the device in its store. So this morning, I had to turn off my recorder while I watched Apple employees power these devices up for the very first time. At 8 a.m., they said the magic words, "Hey Siri, play my favorites." To which Siri responded, "I couldn't find your favorites mix in your music." And that is the problem, according to Michael Prospero, the senior reviews editor at Tom's Guide, which rates tech gadgets.
The HomePod falls behind any other speaker from Google or from Amazon or from anyone else in that Siri just can't do as much as Alexa or Google Assistant.
While Apple was the first major player in the voice assistant market when they launched Siri 7 years ago, companies like Amazon and Google have caught up, making big investments in the artificial intelligence software that powers their own smart speakers. Today, consumers have a lot of choice. They can ask Alexa to play music from their Spotify playlist or read a recipe from allrecipes.com. If they opt for a Google device, they can ask Google Translate to help them brush up on their Spanish or play them podcasts from the iHeartRadio app. But Prospero says that Apple isn't following that kind of open strategy.
The HomePod falls into sort of Apple's walled garden approach, where they try and suck you into their ecosystem, and use their phone, their laptop, their iPad, and so on, and that includes their services.
Which is why the only way you can ask Siri to play music on the HomePod is through Apple Music, not any of your other musical apps. Michael Simon, a staff writer at Macworld, says that the HomePod is another effort to hold people in the Apple universe.
They're a huge company. They make tons of money. I don't think they really worry about these types of niche products, like hitting huge at the start. They have these kind of like littler products that surround the iPhone and the iPad and the Mac.
But not everyone is as focused on Siri's capabilities.
It's not about the smart assistant. I think everyone has this wrong. Everyone has it wrong. It's not about the smart assistant because Siri will be upgraded whenever they feel like they want to upgrade her. It's just software. The microphones are there, the brain's there. So when Siri finally wants to compete with Amazon and with Google, it's just going to be software. But the hardware is going to be there. The sound quality is going to be there.
That's Bryce Shearer, an Apple fan who came to pick up his HomePod this morning in Midtown Manhattan. Shearer is pretty passionate about the quality of Apple products.
I mean, these people are all ridiculous online. They're talking about smart speakers and prices. Look, I wanted a speaker.
For diehards like Shearer, the HomePod is a great speaker, and he believes that someday it will get a bit smarter. But not everyone is as optimistic.
while I don't doubt that Apple is going to make improvements over time, they're starting from a bit of a deficit, and it's a lot to, pay $350 for a speaker with the anticipation that you're going to get these improvements.
The HomePod faces some stiff competition in the market. Amazon says that it has already sold tens of millions of Alexas. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Cassiana McClenahan.
You're listening to Uptown Radio.
There's more to come. Stay with us.
You're listening to Uptown Radio. I'm Juan Torres Falcón.
And I'm Augusta Anthony.
Coming up, the governor wants to expand wind energy in New York, but not everyone is a fan.
And Wendy Rhodes tells us how bail in New York City is becoming a bit more affordable.
These stories and more. But first, the news.
For Columbia News in New York, I'm Wendy Rhodes. Analysts say the fear of rising prices led to a sell-off, which has left both the Dow and S&P down 10% from their all-time highs on January 26th. The S&P 500 fell to a 3-month low, while the Dow braced for its biggest one-week drop since the financial crisis sent stocks plummeting in October 2008. Also from the world of money, congratulations! You probably make more money than Tesla CEO Elon Musk. But unlike you, Musk is worth $21 billion. Tesla announced that Musk's salary last year was less than $50,000, which is $7,000 less than the average household income. And while Musk doesn't actually accept any of his salary, he's getting a $6,000 raise this year. On Tuesday, his company SpaceX launched the most powerful commercial rocket in history. The rocket shot a shiny red Tesla sports car into orbit around the sun on a journey that is expected to last millions of years. The mission is reported to have cost Musk $90 million. And from our neighbors to the north, Canadian police have discovered the bodies of 6 men buried in planters around the city. 66-year-old landscaper Bruce MacArthur was arrested in January in connection with 2 of the murders, but police have continued to uncover additional bodies.
We do believe there are more, and I have no idea how many more there are going to be. The City of Toronto has never seen anything like this, so it is very tiring and very draining for everyone who's involved.
Toronto police have seized more than a dozen planters from around the city and have begun excavating the first of more than 30 sites where MacArthur worked. In sports news, athletes from both North Korea and South Korea marched together in symbolic unity at the opening ceremony of the 23rd Winter Olympics. This ceremony took place only 50 miles from the demilitarized zone where heavily armed guards have patrolled the border between the two countries since 1953. In the last 24 hours, reports from South Korea indicate that they are preparing for a possible nuclear attack from North Korea. But a historic handshake today marks what some hope symbolizes a warming in the relationship. The handshake took place between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and the sister of North Korean President Kim Jong-un, who was not in attendance. In science news, researchers have grown human eggs from tissue to maturity in a lab for the first time. Scientists say the breakthrough might help girls with cancer. Since eggs do not mature until puberty, the new process enables doctors to remove eggs from young girls before they are harmed by cancer or cancer treatment and save them for possible fertilization later. In weather, snow and ice pummeled the Midwest today. Chicago is expecting 10 inches of snow by tonight, with wind chills below 0. New York City will see warmer temperatures this weekend with a 100% chance of rain and highs in the low 50s. It's 35 degrees right now under cloudy skies. In local traffic, the trains are looking pretty good, but the roads are jammed. Traffic is backed up on the MacArthur Causeway between 120th and 164th, and on the Major Deegan between Mott Haven and High Bridge. If your plans are taking you out of town for this weekend, it's smooth sailing through JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. This is Wendy Rhodes, Columbia Radio News.
New Jersey's 11th congressional district is gearing up for a fight. The Northern Suburban District has been under Republican leadership for 3 decades, but last week, long-term incumbent Rodney Frelinghuysen announced that he's retiring at the end of his term. Jennifer Siegel has more on why this red district might turn blue.
If you're wondering why 12-term incumbent Rodney Frelinghuysen has decided not to run for re-election in 2018, you might want to go back to a year ago. That's the sound last February outside Frelinghuysen's Morristown office. 75 people were delivering a petition with 5,000 signatures asking the representative to hold an in-person town hall meeting. The group, NJ 11th for Change, wanted Frelinghuysen to answer directly to constituents about his votes in the House. Siley Avalenda, a leader in the group, says he hasn't had a town hall in over 3 years.
Our representative works for us and is accountable to us and needs to come back and tell us what he's doing on our behalf. And he refused.
So every Friday since, members of the Grassroots Coalition have gathered outside his office. They still want the meeting, and they want voters to take a closer look at their representative.
Our job as a group was essentially to show people this is who you now have, not who you thought you put in that position in '94, but this is who you're voting in now. Is that the person that represents you?
In a statement announcing his resignation, Frelinghuysen didn't say why he isn't running for re-election. But people on both sides of the aisle agree that he's never faced this much vocal opposition for this long.
I don't think he was used to having people outside of his office protesting every week.
John Van Wagner is the president of the Montclair Republican Club. He says that while Frelinghuysen's generally been viewed as a moderate Republican, lately that reputation's faded.
He's been labeled as inching toward very, very pro-Trump in Congress, that he's voted with Trump. He's been kind of tarred. There's a lot of anti-Trump sentiment that bubbles around New Jersey, and the district itself is kind of evolving in a different direction.
Whichever Republican candidate wins the district primary will face Democratic frontrunner Mikey Sherrill. Her campaign's been getting national media attention and has already raised over $1 million. In a campaign ad, the Navy veteran makes a point to differentiate herself from Frelinghuysen.
Every day I visit with people around this district, listening and sharing their concerns. That's something this part of New Jersey hasn't had in a while.
At Sherrill's Fairfield campaign headquarters earlier this week, about 200 people packed into the small first-floor office space for a volunteer information night. Enthusiastic volunteers with clipboards greeted people at the door and welcomed them in. Sherrill spoke to the crowd on a small PA system.
Thank you so much for coming tonight. I sincerely appreciate it.
Julian Keenan drove 30 minutes from Montclair to be there that night. He's been volunteering on the campaign for the last 6 months. He sees a revived interest in state politics, especially among young people.
New Jersey sees itself often as a Democratic and Republican state, and you can only wake up certain voters when certain causes get threatened. So I think Trump has really woken up a lot of Democratic voters in this state.
In June, voters will pick the primary candidates ahead of the November midterm elections. In addition to Sherrill, there are 4 other Democrats running. So far, just one Republican, Martin Hewitt, has entered the race. Jennifer Siegel, Columbia Radio News.
It can be expensive to be charged with a crime. For those facing charges, there can be lawyers' fees, court costs, and lost wages. And currently, the city keeps 3% of your bail deposit, even if you show up for court. But as Wendy Rhodes reports, that will change next week.
Bail fees currently account for $700,000 of New York City's revenue. That's a drop in the bucket for a city with an $88 billion budget. But bail reform activists say that for the defendants who can't afford it, that's big money. Joshua Norkin is an attorney for the Legal Aid Society, which provides legal assistance to New York's poorest defendants. Norkin says the 3% fee is basically the modern-day equivalent of a poor tax because you can't get out of jail without paying it.
For our clients who are already sort of trying to get by or living paycheck to paycheck, taking 3% out of that bail money is something that directly would harm them.
The city agrees that the 3% fee was just too much for many defendants. So they amended the original rule to eliminate the fee, stating in the amendment that the small loss of revenue to the city was not worth the financial burden on its citizens. But some bail reform activists say that eliminating the fee isn't enough. Elena Weissman is the director of the Bronx Freedom Fund, which helps pay bail for low-income defendants. She says that if you get arrested but can come up with quick cash or bond for bail, you can go home. If not, you get locked up. and she thinks that's unfair.
Abolishing this 3% fee is in no way bail reform. People will continue to be caged for their poverty. Just the side effects of it will now be lessened. I hope that it is a sign of things to come and not a way for the city to kind of make piecemeal efforts and call it bail reform.
Activists agree that the city's entire bail policy is in need of a major overhaul, like offering non-monetary alternatives to bail. Bianca Talik is the director of the Corrections Accountability Project at the Urban Justice Center.
I'm happy to see the city making this change, and I think it is really the basis of what's to come, which is hopefully the end of the commercial bail bonds industry.
City officials have vowed to consider large-scale bail reform, but for now, beginning next Saturday, defendants will be getting 100% of their bail deposits back. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Wendy Rhodes.
There are lots of strange places in New York. In January, we sent our reporter to explore one bizarre corner of the East Village.
People have described this place kind of like a car accident. No one wants to be in one, but you want to stop and look. We have this large case here filled with human skulls. There's a beautiful prosthetic arm from turn of the century. There's the fossilized ear bone of a whale. You see, the thing is, people come in here, they'll ask about things like the two-headed cow. It's a real two-head, 2 heads, 2 tails, 5 legs, but 6 hooves. The last 2 legs coming out its back are fused. It's a very rare piece. People come in and be, oh, this is a great like a joke gift, a gag gift for Bob at work. How much is this? And I tell them it's like $4,000, $5,000. They're like, what? Some people wear their weirdo on the inside, and some people wear it on the outside. I remember it was a while ago, this woman walked in. She looks like she's working in a boardroom, like very corporately dressed. And she's looking around, and she ends up buying vintage nudie photos and a circumcision clamp. My name is Mike Zone. I'm one of the owners of Obscura Antiques and Oddities here in the East Village.
That was reporter Elisa Escarce in the East Village for Uptown Radio.
Last week, Governor Andrew Cuomo released a new plan to build offshore wind farms in New York. The Offshore Wind Master Plan charts a course for the slate to power over 1 million homes with clean energy by 2030.
The plans call for the farms to be built 20 miles off the coast of Long Island. It's been applauded by many, but as Bo Hamby reports, not everyone is jumping on board.
Way out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, miles away from the northeast coast, are 5 metal giants. They tower over 500 feet in the air with large metal arms that rotate slowly, generating energy for thousands of homes from the ocean winds that blow by. They are offshore wind turbines, and they are the only 5 in America. But under the new plan, hundreds more of the giants could be coming to New York's waters.
We're going to get jobs, we're going to get clean electricity, and New York is trying to be one of the first movers on this, and that's exciting.
That's Nathaniel Green, Director of Renewable Energy Policy at the National Resources Defense Council. He's excited about the new plan. He says New Yorkers will see only a small increase in their energy bills, and offshore wind could be particularly helpful for New York City.
The boroughs as a whole are very hard to get electricity in, and there's a lot of people that want electricity here.
And Green says it's tricky to power the city because energy has to be transported in from power plants outside the 5 boroughs. But with offshore wind, clean energy could be piped directly in.
This is an electrical resource that can come right in here to the city and provide clean electricity to the biggest demand center in the state.
A demand center that uses up roughly a third of the state's energy on any given day. The new plan would add 2.4 gigawatts to New York's energy capacity, which is enough to power over 1 million homes. Dr. Vijay Modi teaches mechanical engineering at Columbia. He says that's just a drop in the bucket.
That's actually less than 5% of what we do. So the real game changing will occur when this becomes 10%, 20%, 30%. And I think this is just the beginning.
Modi is optimistic. He says the plan represents a long-term commitment that New York is ready to invest in wind power, which will motivate the private sector, which will bring costs down.
These early stage investments will lead to cost competitive energy in a decade.
But keeping costs down isn't the only concern. Over 100 species of animals swim and fly where the turbines would be built, and some appear on endangered lists, like blue whales, leatherback turtles, and the scalloped hammerhead shark. And while clean energy may seem like a no-brainer for environmental activists, that's not always the case. Taffy Williams works as a wildlife rehabilitator in Yonkers, and she's seen up close the kind of damage turbines can inflict on birds.
You know, I get the birds that come in that have been injured, and, most of them hit by bladed wind turbines are going to be killed.
And Williams says turbines can cause other problems, like dangerous noise levels from construction and the destruction of seafloor habitats. Annie Wilson is with the Environmental Law and Justice Project. She's worried too. But she says the impact on the environment could be reduced if the turbines are built on the right site.
Siting is the most important issue always. We can accommodate for the best places without hindering on the development. We can have both.
According to the plan, turbines will have to be built somewhere within a 1 million acre area off the coast of Long Island. Dr. Michael Gerard is director of the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia. He says it's going to be a hard pill to swallow, that there will be an environmental impact no matter where the turbines are placed.
Offshore wind farms will kill some birds in the short term. In the long term, it's very important for the preservation of entire species of birds as well as other creatures.
And preservation is what Cuomo is hoping for. Once the proposed area is approved, construction would begin on the first offshore wind farms. They'd start providing power sometime in 2025 and bring clean energy to New York for at least 2 decades. Bo Hamby, Columbia Radio News.
A much-anticipated exhibit by artist Jan Vo opened at the Guggenheim Museum this morning. Uptown Radio's Alyssa Escarce spoke to some of the first visitors.
Annie Griffin is standing in front of a giant 19th century chandelier on one of the upper levels of the Guggenheim's famous spiral. The chandelier is so large, the baubles at the bottom almost touch the floor. Griffin has an audio tour headset perched on her head. She's focused on her phone, trying to capture the whole chandelier in one photo.
That's something different, from what I'm used to seeing, as in, still life or portraits from some of the well-known artists.
Griffin is from New Zealand. She's been in New York on a work trip for a couple months, and she planned this visit after reading about Jan Vo's work in the news.
I just wanted to expose myself to something quite different, and I have not been disappointed.
The chandelier she's looking at is from the hotel where the Paris Peace Accords were signed, ending the Vietnam War. This is Vo's first big survey show in the U.S., and it's full of historical artifacts from Vietnam's history. Vo isn't well known, which isn't that common for the Guggenheim. The museum gets a lot of tourists, and it typically features big-name contemporary artists like Kandinsky and Van Gogh. Marco Villa is one of those tourists, and he's never heard of Vo, but he likes what he's seeing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think he's telling through this object, it's basically rewinding the history of America. I'm not American. I'm from Italy. So through the object, I'm basically getting to know better the American history.
The exhibit is full of American items. There's white fabric from the chair that furnished the White House during the Kennedy administration hanging on one wall. On another, there's a letter from Robert McNamara accepting his appointment as Secretary of Defense in 1960. Much of the work ties back to the Vietnam War. Vo was born in a village outside Saigon just after the war ended, and his family fled when he was 4 years old. There's a snapshot in the exhibit of Vo and his siblings in a refugee camp in Singapore, wearing party hats for Christmas. A few months after the photo was taken, they settled in Denmark, where Vo lived through college. Vo didn't visit Vietnam again until he was an adult, but the country's history is woven throughout his work.
I think it tells a really interesting story of colonialism and expansion, both from sort of the geopolitical perspective and then also from a religious perspective.
Candace Carlin is visiting from Chicago. She says the cloth from the 2 White House chairs left her thinking.
And it does make me reflect on what I know of that period of history in a very different way than I have before.
For several guests at the Guggenheim, Vo's most powerful pieces are the most personal ones. Clémence Molinati likes a tower built by stacking a washer, a mini fridge, and a TV. An immigrant relief program gave Vo's grandmother the furniture in the 80s.
I think to him it's what represents the house of his grandmother, and that's funny because we all know people who have that in their house.
Jan Vo's work will be at the Guggenheim until May 9th. The show is called We the People. For Columbia Radio News, I'm Elisa Escarce.
Well, that does it for this edition of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our foreman today was executive producer Madeline Thompson. Leading our staff of reporters was senior producer Sarah Wyman.
Director Bo Hamby coordinated our studio production with Colin Marston and Jennifer Siegel.
Mira Gable got this stream live to the web. Juliet Jibkiro helped with production. Editor Stevie Hertz and assistant editor Eileen Grench led our copy team.
Veteran radio professionals Deb Amos, Jilda DeCarli, Ben Shapiro, and Sally Herships, who's celebrating her birthday on Sunday, happy birthday, advised our staff, with support from Carrie Donahue. I'm Juan Torres Falcon.
And I'm Augusta Anthony. Uptown Radio is live on Fridays at 4. Until next time, you can always find us at uptownradio.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.